Woke is a destructive force in the political, intellectual, artistic, and ethical life of society. Bizarre and capricious rules enforced by cancel culture threats, puffed up, unscientific claims to represent the marginalized, insisting that people stay in their lanes and fighting oppression. Woke lunacy manifests much that is harmful with the capitalist imperialist system and its dominant culture, furthering the nightmare of humanity. Woke once meant righteous awareness of racial oppression, but has long since morphed into fanatical lunacy and vicious mob mentality, a bloodlust to target and tear into individuals, while cowardly ducking and often actively obstructing the real and needed fight against the system, especially its overthrow through an actual revolution. Woke lunacy and the fascist steamroller moving through society are in a deadly dance, mutually opposing while fueling and feeding off the other. Fascism is by far the greater danger, but in this dynamic, brazen white supremacy and misogyny feast on and defeat the brittle bravado of woke. At a time of unprecedented change, as the powers that be clash and as cohering norms of the US are ripping, there is a much greater chance to bring this whole oppressive edifice down. We have a chance to aim for something radically different. We have a responsibility to fight for something actually liberating. We must seize this chance and rise to this responsibility. So out of love for humanity and the planet, out of profound respect for truth and science, and out of necessary revolutionary determination for the emancipation of all of humanity, we will defend and debate the following in the public square and in public discourse. So that's how this statement from the RevComs begins, and it goes on to detail and just totally demolish the whole framework of woke identity politics in 7 points and backs it up with a whole lot of substance. And this was released on revcom.us in tandem with the speaking tour that Sunsara Taylor's been on, Woke Lunacy versus Real Revolution.
All right, so we've been featuring the speech that I gave at the most significant event so far on the speaking tour at UCLA a couple weeks ago. We've been featuring that speech and the Q&A that followed on this show in the recent episodes. And we want to bring you more of it today. We're going to bring you more of the question and answer, which gives you a feel for what got opened up in the room when we took on this woke lunacy and we fought for and contrasted it with real revolution as it's been re-envisioned by Bob Avakian and brought to bear the tremendous analysis and exposure he has done of woke lunacy. And you see how it opened up thinking that needs to go and get opened up in a much bigger way in society. We'll talk more about our plans for this tour and your role in it after we share this portion of the Q&A.
So let's watch.
My country, France, like woke has been a concept, a lexicon that has been constructed by the conservatives to discredit like anti-racist, like or queer or anti-patriarchal thought. And I wondered how can you construct and build a left-wing communist revolution if you use the lexicon and the words that has been constructed by conservative people? And that's basically my question. Like, do you think those words are like who constructed those words in America, and how can revolution be thought with the words that are not constructed by Marxists, for instance? Thank you very much.
I'm going to start by using a bunch of words that were not constructed by Marxists, like you used the microphone. We didn't make up that word. She's walking up the stairs. We didn't make up that word. Words describe, if they're useful, they describe something that's objectively real. And I start, and I think we all need to start if we want to change the world, with reality. You can't start with who used the word, who made it up. Is woke a phenomenon? And we say in this big piece up here, woke is a destructive force in the ethical, moral, intellectual, cultural life of society. We say in this piece, woke in its roots came out of the black vernacular and mainly meant being aware of racial oppression. But it has long since morphed into something that is very radically different. And when we talk about woke lunacy, we're talking about the people who stormed in here but don't have the courage to come and make an argument for their position. They just try to shut it down. We're talking about the canceling and erasing of murals. This is not something that's been invented by the fascists. It's being seized on by the fascists, and they are clumping all kinds of things that are legitimate cries for justice as also woke and deserving of attack. But because they use it and also misuse it does not mean it's not a real phenomenon. We have to start with reality. And if we don't do that, then we will never address what's really going on. I mean, there's actually a lot of preoccupation with language and word changing and who made up a word and what the word signifies. And we say also in here, the last thing I'll say on this is, word changing, an obsession over words is no substitution for world changing and looking at the actual reality. So woke is a real phenomenon. We have to name it because it's doing something highly destructive in all the ways I described, and it's doing it in the name of the oppressed. And when fascists do destructive things, a lot of decent people go, oh, that's outrageous. But when people do this woke lunacy in the name of the marginalized or the oppressed, and they marshal and commodify oppressed identity, they intimidate and silence decent people. And so it's really doing a destructive thing. It has to be named, it has to be called out.
I appreciated everything you said against the woke ideology. My first comment is I still don't really see the connection between anti-wokeism and communism. Mm-hmm. And so my question is, you are very correct in espousing an evidence-based approach to pretty much everything, especially policy. So what is the evidence that communism is a better form of government than what we currently have?
Okay, those are two very good questions. Thank you. The reason, okay, first on the relationship between woke and communism. Anti-woke, okay, anti-wokeism and communism is woke right now today in this society among decent people, among people who actually do care about white supremacy, who oppose it, who don't care about it with a kind of a happy feeling, but care about it like they actually know this is a horror, who care about what's being done to women, who care about the planet, the health of the environment and the ecosystems, the decent people. Wokeism is the dominant form of accommodation to this system. And it is the dominant form of intimidation of people from standing up against this system. And that's why we have to take it on, because people as they are right now, the decent people really are caught up in, and it's like an infestation on the college campuses in hiding from reality. That's why I gave the examples of him taking this poster out, and the students, instead of saying, let's stand up and fight to stop this, they said, get off our campus, you're upsetting me. You know, a few years back at Antioch, a man who made a film about Juanita Young, whose son Malcolm Ferguson was killed by police, went to Antioch College, showed this film. And this was before the big uprisings, where this made it in everybody's public conscience. And it was the first time these students were hearing about this horrendous murder that's so systematic and systemic. And instead of getting into that and what needs to be done, instead they all debated the fact and decided that this white filmmaker had no right to make the film. And that's all they wanted to talk about. It's a form of avoiding the struggle. And avoiding the fact that it does take struggle, it does take risk, it does take getting out of your comfort zone, and it does take thinking scientifically. And the other thing about wokeism, and it flows out of the relativism, the postmodernism that is so almost universally taught and enforced, is there is a denial of objective reality. It is where I began. That objective reality is part of white supremacist culture, that it's a white European male construct, that it's a form of violence to say that we all have to be evidence-based in what we're saying. Let's just go with the experience and worship the experience of the oppressed. And it's intersectionality, centering the marginalized. Yes, people experience intersecting forms of oppression. That's true. Just like people with diseases might have intersecting diseases and symptoms. But that doesn't tell you anything about what's giving rise to it, what's beneath the surface. And the whole framework of postmodernism, intersectionality, and in its virulent form, wokeism, is anti-scientific. It is against looking beneath the surface. It is, and the wokeism is anti-rational because it shuts down discourse. Who are you to say that? You're not XYZ identity. It's like the guy who wrote the article saying, actually, James Webb wasn't a homophobe. Here's the evidence. I looked it up. It's a misquote. I found the evidence. It was from this other person. Instead of going, oh, wow, we had the wrong guy, somebody wrote an article against him like 3 days later that said, the straights are here to save us, and said he had no right to speak about it because he wasn't gay. It's anti-rational. It's both anti-rational, anti-scientific. That's one, not both. It's both anti-scientific and it's anti-revolutionary, because it's about fighting for a place within this system rather than looking at the roots of this oppression and the need to overthrow this system. So, which brings me to the second question you asked, very well placed. What is the evidence that communism would be a better system? And it is because every society... Yeah. I'm going to give you a brief answer, but I'm going to invite you to search for the answer. And it's serious and it's important that there is a search, because this is another thing that's been lied about, maligned, distorted. Not a surprise in a capitalist society that's threatened by this. The fundamental problem in the world today, at the base of everything, is that, or the most defining thing about human societies, is we have to reproduce the requirements of life. Food, clothing, shelter. New generations have to be reared. Every society, every human society, that's the most fundamental thing about it. We live today, and then culture grows up on that foundation. Belief systems, relations, ideas, moralities flow out of and reflect that. Today we live in a capitalist imperialist society where the fundamental contradiction of this world, for the first time in human history, is not that there's scarcity. There's enough to meet the needs of all of humanity, to feed, clothe, shelter, and to have a lively and enriched intellectual, cultural, and social life for everybody too. The only reason it doesn't happen is that the massive means of production, the networks of production and transport and communication and technology, they are worked by millions. Socially, billions come together to work to produce all of these things. But what is produced is owned privately by capitalist imperialist, by capitalists, enforced by a capitalist imperialist system, and backed up by laws that are enforced by armies and police. So you have the abundance, but it's privately appropriated, and that's enforced by a state. By overthrowing that state, by overthrowing that system, by implementing a radically different system, you can unleash those same networks of production, that same productive capacity, in a different way towards meeting people's social needs, not towards private appropriation. And you can do it by unleashing the most important resource of all, which is human beings who are thrown away and discarded in their creative capacities. And so socialism on the road to communism is a system that is based on that socialized production for the social well-being of the society and the world. And then how you go about running that society and uprooting all the leftovers of this society, how it's trained people to think and act, how you have new laws, how you have new culture, how you have new media, how you have new education, all that and more is spelled out in this Constitution. It's very lively, including a lot of encouragement for debate and critical evaluation, because you need that challenge from every direction and everybody participating in that. So it's a bigger answer. To really answer it, you're right, you'd have to put your, but I'm trying to give you a piece of it and invite you to read this Constitution and do hold it up against the U.S. exploiters version, the U.S. exploiters Constitution. And also on the website, revcom.us right now, Bob Avakian just republished a piece that breaks down the U.S. Constitution and how it is not only written by slave owners, but always and can only protect relations of exploitation. It's a very profound piece. I would invite you to dig into that. Come to Laval tomorrow, talk more. It couldn't be a more important question.
Hi. I'd like to start by saying I've agreed with a lot of the talk, and a lot of the points were very well placed. But I do have some concerns as to pushing back too much on wokeness and losing some of the potential good. For example, like when it comes to the problem of identity, it's a problem that you pit identity politics generally, or wokeness, against the idea of an objective reality. And what I argue maybe is that an objective reality is something that is real, right? but is not necessarily easily accessible. And upholding identity can be a useful heuristic towards voices that are necessarily less heard could be better heard in order to get to a better objective reality. And I think another thing is that many people have argued that this idea of stepping out of your safe space, and this is something I fundamentally agree with, that we need to be able to step out of our safe space. But also I think as a matter of strategy, there are those who are simply better able to step out of their safe space, and it is when their safe space is not as threatened as others, I think. So I think there is something to be said about recognition that it is harder for someone who is more oppressed to step out of their safe space. And I think that's something that can be overlooked in discussions about the excesses of wokeness, is that space needs to be made for comrades who find it more difficult because of their situation to step out and learn this reality.
Okay, so I want to respond to what you're saying this way. It is absolutely the case that there are people, oppressed people, whose voices and experiences have been erased, suppressed, distorted, lied about, and it is profoundly important that we hear those voices and learn from those experiences. That's why I gave the example, in the speech, there's many that could be given, of this woman in Harlem, and it said everybody should learn from that experience. It matters when the parents whose children have been killed by police speak about that and tell and expose that to the world. Everybody should hear those experiences and those voices. And the institutional forces and the cultural forces that have suppressed the voices of the oppressed and the stories of the oppressed and the histories of the oppressed need to be fought against. So that part is very important. But where identity politics and wokeism goes wrong, and why it needs to be fought, is that it tells you have to stop there. And that then all you can do is follow the experience of the oppressed. But just because you're oppressed does not mean you know where that oppression comes from, what gave rise to it, how it should be ended, what it will take. Most people have no idea. That takes science for everyone. Now, oppressed people, just like anybody else, can take up the tools of science, but there's a struggle between communism and rationality and scientific thinking on the one hand and wokeism on the other, which is actually not just fails to look beneath the surface, but opposes that. And this is where it does great harm. And you do see people, shouting down others, canceling others, refusing to look at the evidence they marshaled because of their identity. And that's destructive. So that was one part of it. You also raised...
safe spaces.
Oh, safe spaces. It is absolutely the case that some people face much higher risk. When Sean Bell was killed by police, most of you are probably way too young. Some of you probably weren't even born. He was shot 50 times on his wedding day in Queens, Jamaica, Queens, black man. When he was killed by police, we went out, the RevComs went out to the neighborhood that he was killed in and that he lived in, and we organized people. You were part of that, right? Noche Diaz was a big part of that, to stand up against that. And one of the most striking things at the time was that all these young black women came out, and none of the black men came out. Young black men. And as we talked to them, because they were furious. They hated this, but as we talked to them, they all had charges hanging over them. So if they got picked up, you get picked up at a protest. Maybe if you're a student, it's something that's an inconvenience. You want to fight it, but it's not going to threaten your whole life, most likely. But these guys, it could be 15 years. It could be life. They're facing charges already. So it was much more risky for them to get involved. And ways did need to be found for them to get involved in the revolution and in this struggle that didn't have the same immediate risks for them. And people who don't face those risks so immediately need to step out there and join that fight, which is why it's so destructive to tell white people, stay in your lane, that's not your place. It's why it's so destructive to tell everybody, don't concern yourself with oppression that doesn't affect you directly. We need a movement of people that is stepping up and taking and putting ourselves on the line, not retreating from it. So those unevennesses those unevennesses are very real and very profound, and we have to have the maturity to traverse them together. But the goal cannot be realized of safe space for anybody in this system. And so while we should take into account those unevennesses, and people need to put it on the line and take greater risk where they have more ability to do so, everybody has to put it on the line in one way or the other, because this world, there are things bigger than one's safety. Much bigger than any individual safety. And in the struggles Bob Avakian, I quoted from him, in any real struggle against real oppression, people stand up and they sacrifice. There are many Black Panther Party leaders and fighters who gave their lives. There are many people in the fight for civil rights who gave their lives, and it was right. There were many people who gave their lives in 2020 uprising against the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and it was a righteous thing. It was a life given that had meaning. We don't want that to happen. But that's because of the system that we live under that carries out this terror and repression. That violence is on them. And if we want that to stop, we can't hide from it. We have to get them off this system, off the face of the earth and off the backs of humanity. Because every day that they go on, millions and millions of people, 1.9 million people in the prisons have no safe space. The millions of women who are pregnant and desperate right now in Kentucky and Texas and Florida, they don't have a safe space. So we have to step out of our comfort zones. And while we do that, we take into account these differences. But safe space as a goal is bankrupt, and it is an illusion. Because there is no safe space in a nuclear war. There is no safe space in a fascist America. And that's where we're headed. So we have to lift our sights, and we have to become much more daring.
So that was a really exciting question and answer, and that's just a little taste of it. We'll show more next week, but you really get a sense of how, this woke framework, which has been paralyzing and suffocating a whole generation of students and artists and intellectuals, especially on college campuses like this, how that framework can get broken, and people can get exposed to a whole different way to understand and change the world, and have their sights lifted to, a whole different way to organize society. You were bringing them the Constitution for the new Socialist Republic in North America. So this whole experience, which we saw, in a microcosm at UCLA, it needs to get scaled up in a big way. And, we have big plans to take this tour all over the country and really break open this discussion and debate, throughout society.
Yeah, we are really fighting for a young generation. Look, you can't make revolution without youth, without students, without young people. And like you said, they're indoctrinated and suffocated by this wokeism, or intimidated by those who are. And we are fighting to demolish that and to win people to an actual revolution, to seize this rare time when revolution is more possible. And I think what you saw in that room is a microcosm of what we want to open up in society, which is people actually thoughtfully debating, engaging, trying to sort out what is right, what's wrong, and through that process, winning blocks of people to real revolution. So we want to take this much higher, and we want to call on all of you who are watching to get involved in this. And the number one first thing you need to do is to go to revcom.us and read the work from Bob Avakian on woke lunacy. There is nothing like this. If you do not do this, you really have you're disarming yourself to understand what this framework is, why it's so damaging, where it came from, and how we can take it on and win people away from it. And then after you do that, and as you're digging into that, we also want to call on you to write to us, to volunteer, to work on this effort, to get this speaking tour out, to get this takedown of woke lunacy out in the world. Download it from revcom.us, take it out to museums, to theaters, to places where events at libraries or other intellectual events and on campuses over the summer, and meet people, raise money with it, donate to this, and write to us to get involved so that we can really use this summer to spread this and then really take the campuses by storm in the fall. That's our plan.
All right, we'll be back with more next week.